Alyssa Nightblade and the Bloodblades had been following the dwarves for the past few days. Sending out her shades to monitor their movements, she felt that the group would lead her into one of the passageways that led to the deep tunnels below the area. Alyssa had heard from her sources that one such place contained a sarcophagus of an ancient tomb king that once ruled this area. Within his collection of gold and trinkets was rumored to be a dagger taken from one of the first priests of Cain, of which Alyssa was a descendant of. The Nehekaran had taken the dagger as a spoil of war, and the Dark Mage wanted this dagger back in her family's possession. Her sources mentioned only that this area was once held by the king, but did not realize what he had collected. The Shades had reported seeing a dwarven party enter a small cavern to the west, far too small to hold the troops that the dwarves possessed, so she assumed that it had to be a passage within the deeper caves. The only thing the bearded folk were good for was mining, and some mining slaves along with the dagger would be a boon as well to her family's coffers. They had also reported finding another small entrance that the dwarves had not discovered, so slowly she began to move her troops into the small entrance under the cover of darkness, hoping to catch the dwarves off guard. So we've got a pretty standard battle line scenario going on here, except that we're using the underground rules for this whole battlefield. So the stalactites dropping from the ceiling are going to have a huge impact, but for the most part, the other rules didn't really. The pitfalls affected a little, and I'll try and point those out as they come. The thing to keep in mind here is that the mission that the Dark Elves are on, there is a Nehekaran Sphinx in the center of the board. Skip needs to get his Dark Mage Alyssa over to that and actually riddle the Sphinx before the end of the game. If he does that, then he has successfully claimed the sacrificial dagger for his army. So that's pretty much all the details here. Let's go ahead and get into deployment. So we basically have the whole dwarf army here. We've got a gyrocopter. Next to that is a unit of what looks like 20 dwarf warriors with hand weapon and shield. Next to that is a unit of, looks like 20 iron breakers as well. There is his Thane, Forik, bearer of the van, as well as his runesmith, who is serving as the general. Then he has over here you can see the organ gun, and next to the organ gun is Gris Stonebeard, his master engineer. You can also see the two 3-inch pie plates there are poison gas from the scenario from the underground fight, but they really didn't have any impact on anybody. So the Dark Elves here start with 10 shades. Then over here he's got 20 Corsairs with Alyssa, his level 2 Dark Mage. Then he's got 10 Dark Shards. And then he's got, looks like 20 Executioners. So they're the great weapon wielders. So definitely some good troops, not necessarily as much chaff as he might need, but we'll go ahead and see how this works out for him. So, start of the game, stalactites start falling from the ceiling. One of them hits the gyrocopter and inflicts a single wound. And Dark Elves get turn 1, and they come on aggressively. The Corsair unit needs to get within the range of riddling the Sphinx next turn. The Executioners want to go get mixed up with something. He does not move his Shades because his Shades were targeted by pitfalls this turn, and so if they take any movement whatsoever, they're going to take dangerous terrain. So magic didn't really accomplish anything. The Shades open fire on the Engineer. He looks out Sir a decent number of them, and he doesn't end up taking any wounds, but the looked out Sir on the organ gun did actually inflict a wound on it. So we then go to Dwarf turn 1, and the gyrocopter flies over the Corsairs, inflicts 2 wounds with his bombs, then lands, and because everything is in a cavern, he takes dangerous terrain and takes a second wound. Then you can see the Engineer is hiding behind the building, though still within 3 inches of the organ gun, and the 2 dwarf units begin splitting off around the fountain in the center so they can deal with the threats coming in from both sides. Then during shooting, the organ gun goes off with a ridiculous number of hits and reduces the executioners by half. They do not panic, however, so they're still staying there. And then start of game turn 2, Stalactite falls right on the executioner's head to add insult to injury and kill 3 more of them. And at the top of the turn, the Dark Elf Wizardess riddles the Sphinx and does so successfully and becomes a Lore Master of Death, in addition to being a level 2 of Dark Magic. And now that they are not pitfalled, the Shades succeed their charge into the organ gun and hit it so that they will overrun into the Engineer. And then the Executioners apparently decide that they are no more combat powered, so they swift reform and move back to the petrified forest here to attempt to claim some loot. Turns out that it is a wildwood and is going to try and beat them in the head this turn. During magic, the wizard tried to get off a big purple sun and failed to cast, so shooting was, I think, killed 1 Ironbreaker or something very ineffectual like that. So we go into combat, and the organ gun, of course, dies to the Shades, and Shades succeed their overrun into the Engineer. So we go into Dwarf turn 2, and the Dwarves continue to push up. They have not declared any charges, they just need to get within a short enough range to do so. Then at the end of the movement phase, the Wildwood goes wild and kills 3 more Executioners. During shooting, the Gyrocopter opens up on the Corsairs and kills just an absolutely ridiculous number of them. Then during combat, the Shades murder Griss and turn around and face what we discover is the flank of the Ironbreakers. So we go into top of turn 3, and a couple of more stalactites fall, 1 Ironbreaker dies, and looks like 2 or 3 of the Dark Shards. So the Dark Elves decide to go balls to the walls, and the Shades charge the flank of the Ironbreakers, and they were pitfalled this turn, so I think they take a wound from that. And the Corsairs charge the front of the Dwarf Warriors. Both of them succeed their charges. Then, in the interest of not being hit with a forest anymore, the Executioners swift reform and run out of the petrified forest. During magic phase, the Dark Elves get Power of Darkness off on the Corsairs, so that's Strength 4 Corsairs going against Toughness 4 Dwarves. That's actually not terrible. Then we go into combat, and the Shades absolutely fluff against the Dwarves. The Dwarves manage to kill 3 of the Shades. I think no Dwarves were killed, and they break and run away. The Ironbreakers choose not to pursue, however. So then we go into combat over here, and really the only person winning here is whoever made all the armor. The Dark Elves get, it's either 2 or 3 guys dead, and the Dwarves only kill 1 back, so the Dark Elves win, but the Dwarves aren't going anywhere. They're stubborn, leadership 8 with a reroll, or 9 with a reroll, whatever it is, so yeah, they're so not going anywhere. So I guess this is top of 4, or 3. I don't remember. Either way, stalactites come down, 3 more of the Executioners are killed, which is enough to make them panic, so they panic back into the woods that's trying to kill them. 1 Ironbreaker dies. The Shades do rally, and the Dark Shards turn to try and shoot down the Gyrocopter. Oh, and a couple of Corsairs die as well. That actually might have been the end of turn 4, because here comes the Dwarves. Ironbreakers charge the flank of the Dark Shards and manage to succeed it. Gyrocopter decides to get the hell out of Dodge, lands in this petrified forest, and loots it for 10 gold pieces or so. And then at the end of the movement phase, the Wildwood here does succeed in hitting the Executioners and kills all 5 of the remaining, so they were killed by the forest. Then during this combat, things finally start going the Dwarves' way. few other executioners are killed, and they break and run, but the dwarves don't catch them. But the unit is under 25%, so they're going to be rallying on double ones. Then over here, the dwarves kill all but one of the dark shards who flees. The dwarves choose not to chase and reform, so they're going to head to that forest and try and loot it for gold before the end of the game. Then, top of the next turn, Stalactite falls again right on the head of this remaining dark shard and kills him. So over here, the rest of the shades are going to head for that building to try and loot it. And the Corsairs and his wizard fail to rally, so they take off running a little more. And this is just a general overview of what the board looks like at this point. So we go into top of the next turn, and Stalactite falls, hitting both of the units that are running here. One Corsair dies, and 2 or 3 dwarves die. Corsairs fail to rally, so they continue running forward. Maybe the last run that I showed you was actually the dwarves chasing them. I don't quite remember. But they're running. And the shades go in the building and get a few coins. Then during the dwarf's turn, they go into the forest, and they end up, the forest is trapped for them when they try and loot it, but their armor saves hold out and they take no damage. And then the dwarf warriors at the bottom run up closer because he's going to try and either chase them off the board or catch and destroy the wizards and the corsairs before the end of the game. So then, top of 6, I think this is top of 6, the stalactites go off again and kill the remainder of the corsairs, which lets the wizardess rally on an 8. Problem is she's now within 6 of that building, which is a dwarven brewhouse, so she's immune to psychology, so she couldn't even flee if she wanted to from the dwarf warriors that are coming to get her. And this is pretty much where it looks like at the end of the game, the dwarves try and charge the wizardess and end up failing their charge. So this is what leaves us off. As Forik pulled his axe from a nearby elf, he turned and looked over the battlefield. The remainder of his forces were now rushing forward after the fleeing Cainite elves. He knew that they would chase him down, but he also suspected that it might arise another battle that they had not yet prepared for. So he called off the pursuit and focused them on various other tasks. "Rolus!" Forik called, seeing the dwarf engineer pulling himself from a nearby area of rubble. "I'm fine, Forik. It's just a flesh wound," Rolus called back. The pair clasped arms and met back up with Gris Stonebeard to discuss the plans they had prepared for the tomb. It would be transformed into their first outpost, their command center in these lands. It was good and defensible, with only 2 true ways in and out, and that would help considerably in the construction of their fortifications. They would cut apart the innards of the tombs and reshape them to true dwarven standards. This task would take some time, but once completed, they would be nearly impossible to drive from these lands. Clan Vale would be remembered for their commitment to duty, and it was in that hope that Forik saw his family rise to the top. But before the tomb fort could be completed, and before he could lay claim to the honor and glory of his deeds, there were tasks yet to be done. He needed various materials to make sure that the fort could withstand any barrage, mundane or magical. Only then could they call upon King Nor to hurry his way to these lands. So it was a victory for the dwarves, and between what they had looted and the number 6 result on the victory table, the dwarves end this game with having gained 34 gold pieces. So not only is this the first time the dwarves have claimed a victory in one of the campaign games, but it's also the first time they've claimed any gold as well, so definitely a big win for Michael. So, with another loss for the Dark Elves, they still ended up netting 14 gold pieces, I believe was their final total. But obviously they lost this game, but luckily they rolled the result on the table that made them lose a Regiment of Renown. But the Dark Elves had not gained a regiment of renown so far, so there was really nothing for them to lose there. All in all, it was a pretty fun game to watch. Uh, I think one of the things that definitely helped turn it was the organ gun hitting out of the park and just decimating the executioners. And then when the shades finally hit, just completely fluffing really collapsed that whole right flank for the Dark Elves, and the Dwarves were just able to be in a good position to maximize the on that mistake. So hope you guys enjoyed watching this one. It was another fun one for the campaign. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below, and I'll get to them as soon as I can. Otherwise, thank you guys for watching, and we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.